This is the Knirk Gustafson Instructional Design Model. I've looked at 2 or 3 different graphics of this model, but it hadn't stuck in my memory. The name from the 2 authors were not helpful either. There are other ID models such as ADDI, R2D2, and iCare, and those are all acronyms and therefore have built-in mnemonics. Kemp is the name of a major dairy company in Minnesota where I grew up, and all the ovals remind me of the spots on the cows. I've decided devices for the others too, but not the good old Knirk Gustafson. I decided about 4 weeks ago in our discussion board that I would attempt this virtual world version of the Knirk Gustafson ID model in order to try to help other graduate students and me finally learn this model with some memory permanence. As you'll see, I've tried to add visual cues in the construction of this 3D model of the instructional design model to help visual learners tie the concept to the phases or the steps in the model. So here we have the Knirk and Gustafson ID model as a factory of sorts. You see the different buildings. There's the problem determination building, number 1. Number 2 is the design building, and number 3 is the development building. Let's go right into it. As we enter the first building, the problem identification building, or problem determination building, we reach the front desk. And like the information desk in a building, this is the first thing we see as we encounter the problem. Here we'll begin the needs assessment and task analysis in Identify Problem. Next we'll move on to the data center, which houses the learner's entry-level skills, where we'll start collecting data from existing knowledge, skills, learning styles, attitude, and limitations. We can move next to the planning room, which has plenty of chalkboards to scribble out and revise. This area of the model is where we first start to target in on what the learners should learn, and that's where we start to formulate the instructional goals. You may note in other drawings of this model that there is not a set order between the learner's skills and instructional goals section. They should occur at the same time, and I'll show you that here. Go back to the model. It goes from either direction from Identify Problems. As long as that happens, then we're doing the right thing. So back into instructional goals. From there we move on to Organize, and I've seen different versions of the model where it says Organize, Organize Management, or Organize and Managing. Finally, in this problem determination building, we plan, organize, coordinate, evaluate, and report again with the SME or client. And so that's what the conference table is for. And the file cabinets. On to building 2 in our tour, which is the design building. In the design building, we begin to develop our objectives. Moving along, we take the knowledge we have learned of instructional goals and the learner attributes to develop objectives, making sure to keep those on target with our instructional goals. Next, further into the design building, we specify strategies. Now the rest of the model was harder for me to visually represent. I decided to leave it abstract, showing the steps in general terms. Perhaps a follow-up build would improve the look of the model. In this step, we would consider the learner profile, aptitude treatment interaction, presentation strategies, and perception, learning, and communication. From here we go to specify media. Just as we need to decide what to watch on our big screen, we need to decide media characteristics and media selection. Characteristics must focus on what works for our problem. Objectives and learners. Selection must ensure those students learn the objectives. As we move into the last building in our tour, we go into the development stage. The first area in the development stage is to select the development materials. These may be from a library of existing materials and or creation of new materials. Most importantly to consider is that they align with the objectives. From there, let's go over to the laboratory, where we will analyze the results. In this step, we look very closely at formative evaluation. Summative evaluation comes after completion of the development phase. Here we look at effectiveness, efficiency, cost, user acceptance, and logistics, continually keeping the objectives in mind. The next phase, or step in the development phase, is to revise materials. This step can recur in a cycle of revision until criterion levels, behaviors, and degree statements from objectives are met. I tried to represent this by taking the original black car model that was being created in this factory and now exhibiting a white car. So, the last stop in our tour is in the development building is the implementation. Actually, there's one more step, and that is the prototype. We need to create and test a prototype model. Only after continued formative evaluation of the model do we move it out the door to full delivery of implementation. Now, the fun thing about this model is that as I step through it sequentially, it may or may not happen exactly in that order. Of course, we're going to go through the different buildings or the different stages of design, but as there's no set direction of how to proceed through the building in each building, there's no real defined way of saying, well, you have to do this before you do that, and you have to do this other before you do the next. There are some procedures that are pretty set. You need to develop your goals and objectives before you start developing or revising anything. But for example, let me go in this model over to the laboratory, and as the narration that I already spoke, as the narration pointed out, you can go from selecting materials to analyzing results to revising materials, back to analyzing those results, back to revising again, back to the results, back to revising again. It can just keep going on and on and on until you think you have something, and then you have the prototype, which you can then test and test and test. And so there's no real defined way of, here you have to do it exactly this way, and if you stop or exit the building before or later, then you're fired. It's not as set in stone as that. So anyway, here's the instructional design model from Knirk Gustafson as shown in a different light.